Say it.
Welcome to GamePunx bonus round. My name is Ryan.
And I'm Ben.
And today we are going to be talking about one of the most interesting subjects that we've had on bonus round so far. Not that the other ones are boring, but I feel like this one has so much in it worth discussing. We're going to be talking about RPG battle systems because they're very different from one another.
Yeah, they vary wildly from game to game. And
despite the fairly negative impressions I think a lot of people who aren't into RPGs have about the level of complexity of RPG battle systems, or like the level of similarity between them.
Yeah.
There is a great amount of difference between
I feel
something
the problem
like...
there too is people... when people think RPG, they strictly think turn-based Final Fantasy, Persona...
Yeah, turn-based combat, exactly.
Yes, when
and
there's
it's really not
RPG
like that.
games that... Like, RPG is such a big genre that covers so many different styles of games that limiting it to that is ridiculous.
Yeah,
Dark Souls is an RPG.
The most popular RPGs in the world, arguably, would be Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Pokemon. Yes. And all of those games, with the exception of most of the later Final Fantasies, are defined by a very strict turn-based battle system.
Yes.
So I understand where this false impression comes from, but if you look at some of the popular series that stand outside of the regular turn-based stuff, like even the Persona series to an extent, and definitely the SMT games after 3, have a very different kind of turn-based battle system, which is something that also happened in kind of the midpoint of the Final Fantasy series for a couple of years as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to talk about there, but I guess we should probably start off with those very basic turn-based combat systems, because those are super easy to discuss and they're kind of where the genre begins.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's safe to say it's where most people get their start in RPGs.
Yeah, Pokemon for sure. It's the biggest gateway RPG drug.
It's where I got my start in RPGs, and it made me love turn-based combat. And most of the iterations of Pokemon actually just made me love it more, where you can make a Pokemon like hold an item, so if its health dipped below like 20%, it would eat and heal, or like
and then there's like separate things like this physical special split in Generation 4, which changed the means by which a Pokemon attacks and what kinds of attacks affect what kinds of Pokemon, or what kinds of or ground type Pokemon, for instance, flying type Pokemon not being affected by ground type moves and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of very, very interesting, and like having to use items to make that shit happen.
Like, it's very like boilerplate RPG now, but when those games first came out, it was like, oh, this is dope. This is amazing.
And they're still iterating on the system today. They're always trying to add something new and different and fun, which is why...
I remember I got, I think it was an alpha, I got a Jolteon, and it had the ability where if it gets hit by a thunder attack, it just heals. It doesn't get damaged at all, it just gets healed. And I was like, yo! That makes so much sense, let's go!
The first 2 games have a very basic battle system. That's where you start with you have your opponent on one end, you on the other. You take turns based on your speed stat. Whoever goes first has the highest speed, and that's something that's commonplace amongst very early RPGs, starting all the way back with Dragon Quest. But Dragon Quest battle system is kind of like the parent, I guess, like of all of these turn-based systems, because that's basically where it begins, and that's kind of like Yuji Horii trying to find a way to translate the combat of a game like Wizardry or Ultima to a more friendly console gamer headspace. And so he defines and creates the turn-based combat system that we know now. But in the first game, like a defining aspect of it is it's just a single player against singular enemies. There's no party, so there's no party system. Mm-hmm. There aren't different job classes. The only thing that really exists is physical attacks and magic. So that's a pretty big kind of like place to start out. But then in Dragon Quest II, you get the party system,
Yeah.
And then in Dragon Quest III, you get a job system. And you see how that combat system evolves over time. And now Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy, is based primarily on Dragon Quest's battle system. It looks a little different, but effectively works the same way.
Mm-hmm.
As does Mother, the original Mother on the NES. And all of those games kind of take a lot from some of the super early Dragon Quest, so very much like Dragon Quest 1 and 2. Those are kind of the bones of the battle systems in some of these other series. And then from this point onward, each of those series veers in a completely different direction, because by Earthbound, say Mother 2, you have a rolling health meter that constantly scrolls up or down depending on how you're hit, and you have a chance to kind of save yourself from dying if you use a certain health item before that counter runs down to low and 0 and kills you. And then in Final Fantasy III, you have the addition of a hyper complex job system, which changes the nature of how you organize your party. That's something that's common to Dragon Quest III as well.
Yeah.
But those are kind of the bones of the system that goes into Pokemon, and Pokemon still plays very similarly to something like the original Dragon Quest, but it's the additions they make over time. So like we said, the abilities and adding new types which change the dynamics of combat. So adding the dark type and steel type in Gen 2, then in Gen 3 the addition of abilities. Gen 4 is the physical special split. Gen 5 is kind of a refinement of the physical special battle system.
Yeah, they kind of fleshed it out a little better.
Yeah, it works a lot more smoothly, and those are the best looking 2D Pokemon battles in the whole series.
And then they added Fairy type, which of course is the best type. Yeah,
Fairy type is great. It provides a panacea to your dragon related problems.
Yes, of course. Do you have dragon problems? We have
Fairy types.
Sylveon.
Get over here. I do like that you could just crush those motherfuckers with steel if you don't want a fairy near you. Just smack it with a steel bat and it'll get rid of it immediately.
Yes.
But all of this is to say that these base elements that go into the most basic of JRPG battle systems eventually, I guess, in our opinion, fully evolve into something really cool and unique and super fun when we get to Bravely Default.
Yes. Which is probably one of my favorite turn-based systems outside of the SMT Persona series.
Which
I really
would be
like how
of,
SMT and Persona handles their shit, especially with Persona 5, taking a little bit more from the SMT than the other Persona games.
Yeah, that one takes a bit from the press turn system, which is one we can discuss later if we have time.
Yes, of course.
Because that's a fairly unique battle system.
Yeah,
this
might be a 2-parter bonus round actually. Because
we can always do another one. Mm-hmm. But a couple of notable ones, I guess, to start off. Would be Bravely Default has a system called the Brave and Default.
Yes,
which moves.
What?
The Brave and Default moves are added to the menu of a fairly standard turn-based battle system. And when you brave and you default, cool shit happens, and it changes how you approach combat in the game. So why don't you take it away?
I mean, it's really I feel like it was kind of added to make people who are hesitant of turn-based combat. Jesus, why am I saying it like that? Of turn-based combat, feel a little more like able to do it.
Yeah, because, it's a lot more user friendly. Than,
the Brave option.
It feels less antiquated and a lot more quick.
We'll explain it real quick, just so in case no one's played the Bravely Default series or Final Fantasy IV, I think. No.
No. The only other game that has a similar enough system would be the what do you call it? The Octopath Traveler battle system.
Yes, Octopath Traveler. Yes,
which is
made
kind of an
team.
evolution.
Yes, made, like I'm pretty sure.
No, we will talk about Final Fantasy IV right after this, because that's a huge step in a different direction.
No, that's the job system. It's true. I get them.
No, that's the. We'll talk about it later, but you'll see.
Yes. Anyway, so the Brave option will give you up to, I believe, 4 turns of attacks. So you can attack
in one move.
4 stacks. but it takes you out of the combat for 4 turns.
Exactly.
Whereas the default option will be, I believe it is a defense.
It's basically your basic guard or defense option.
Yes, it's a guard option that you can also stack for about 4 turns.
Yeah, and if you stack that option, it gives you an additional 4 turns to stack in the following turns.
So you default 4 turns, and then you can attack 8 turns the next 4 after 4 turns have passed.
Yeah, so it's kind of a high-risk reward battle system that speeds the flow of combat up really nicely, and
especially in the early game.
In the early game,
you kind of have to futzing around with the default a little more, but you can just kind of bravely through the latter half of the first. Jesus. Yeah, you can bravely.
I guess like the first part of the
half.
game. Yeah,
the first half. Yeah,
for
sure.
The
first time loop.
Yeah, and then by the time you get to the part of the game in which time begins to loop, you have to start kind of learning how to properly utilize the system to your advantage, more so than just using it to stack up attacks.
Yeah.
Because there's some complex shit going on.
Yeah, exactly. You can brute force the first half of the game. Well, the first time, like before the time loop hits. But
by the time you get to that point, it's really like you got to start thinking cleverly about how you're utilizing this system, which makes it a great system because it's complex enough that you can use it to cheese through part of the game. But when the game wants to get serious and throw you a curveball, it absolutely can.
Yeah, and it does. No hesitation.
Yeah, and there's something that it really helps with, and that's grinding. Grinding is probably one of the JRPG player's least favorite things to do.
Also one of the most important things to do in every JRPG.
Yeah, in almost every JRPG, regardless of how well designed they are, level grinding is necessary.
It's the mindless walking around the danger zone, getting a battle that you know is low level will give you not that much experience, but not having to think too much. So you just stack Brave 4 times, attack with 4 characters, match over, rinse, repeat.
And it's really, really helpful to stack those levels for later parts of the game in which some of those bosses can fucking overpower you like nobody's business.
Can they ever.
Holy shit. That game gets unforgiving towards its latter half. And the same can be said for...
that's kind of why I fell off of it, was I was just like, wow, the difficulty spike and just...
Yeah.
I mean, immediately...
The game expects you to grind throughout every part of the game, basically.
Yeah, the thing that killed me was not the difficulty spike. I can handle that. It was more where the story went, and I kind of just fell off.
It gets a little confusing as well. Something to be said though is that this makes the level grinding super accessible to most people because you can kind of futz through it pretty quickly. Same goes for its sequel, Bravely Second, and then as I said in Octopath Traveler, while it's not as easy a game to grind in, this combat system is present in a sense, in that you still have the ability to stack attacks and use defense to stack them. But the game plays a little differently. It doesn't feel as smooth, because the aesthetic they're going for in Octopath Traveler is that of an SNES era RPG. And so it lacks some of the modern flourish that I feel you get pretty strongly in Bravely Default.
Mm-hmm.
It remains to be seen what kind of iteration of this system will be ameliorated upon in the new game for the Switch. But
we're planning a Touch Generation episode for.
Mm-hmm. And we're definitely going to talk about Bravely Default a lot more closely there. I guess
because even though I fell off, it's I think one of the best JRPGs I've played in a very long time.
Yeah, it's got very likable characters, a great story, a very well developed fictional world, and a very fun job system.
No, like that's the thing. Just everything about we're not turning this into a Bravely Default episode, but that game's amazing.
Yeah, it's great, and it really exemplifies why the base elements of that early turn-based battle system design still work in the long run if iterated upon in a clever and interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something that's kind of evident of that is how the battle systems in Final Fantasy evolved following Final Fantasy III. So in Final Fantasy IV, which is my personal favorite video game of all time, and also my favorite game in the series, you get the introduction of the active time battle system. And this is kind of the battle system that we see present in Final Fantasy up all the way through to Final Fantasy IX. So it's a pretty ubiquitous system for a very long time in the series, and then when you get to 10, it's a bit different, and then by the time you get to 11 and onwards, each game has its own nearly proprietary battle system that functions very differently from these ones. But the ATB system is the battle system that you will find in Final Fantasies 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And each of those games do it a little differently, but they all have the same base design, which is effectively there is a time meter that is affected by your character's speed stat, and the enemy has an unseen time meter just as well. And this allows you to kind of feel as if you are participating a lot more actively, hence the name, in the battle by not just kind of sitting around and thinking for 5 minutes about what move you want to use, but instead being forced by the speed of this time meter and by your enemies being able to attack you based on their own speed stat.
It makes the turn-based combat feel a lot more action-oriented.
Exactly.
It's an RTS and less of an RPG.
Well, it's certainly a minor real-time system flourish that is added to an RPG battle system. And
because the thing too to mention, I mean, it's like this in 7, but if you just kind of sit there and think too long, the enemies will loop attacks on you while you're like,
you'll get fucking demolished.
You gotta go.
It's super, super brutal at times, so you really have to be able to think on your toes, and it helps make it less of a passive activity. Especially grinding, it becomes a lot more like everything feels a lot more dire, especially when you reach a boss battle. Christ, does it ever feel dire?
Yeah.
And there's always interesting ways in which you can affect this. And then later on in the series, because of the introduction of the ATB meter, which is the time meter that's running, you get the introduction of things called time magic, which are the kind of further iterations of spells that used to affect your speed stat, but now affect the ATB meter. So spells like haste, spells like slow, these change the nature of how quickly or how slowly you can attack. And this system is not only used in, say, these select Final Fantasy games, but it's actually iterated upon and turned into something separate called the ATB System 2, and you find that in Chrono Trigger. That's the battle system in Chrono Trigger. It's effectively the ATB system, but it looks a lot different because Chrono Trigger's battles happen on the field. And you can kind of move around and change your positioning, but it is still effectively the characters running on individual time meters judged by the speed stat that they have. So it's something that was very well liked at Square at the time, and it's something that I'm happy that the team who are making Chrono Trigger, which was kind of a dream team of people from both Square and Enix who had both worked on Final Fantasy games and on the Dragon Quest games, kind of marrying the best of both worlds of their battle systems into something really fun that, I mean, to this day, how many people consider Chrono Trigger one of the best games ever made, if not at least the best RPG on the SNES? So many people, right? And it's for a good reason. That battle system, it works super well and it's very fun. But something cool about the ATB system before we move on is that I find it kind of cool that the designer of the ATB system based it off of his love of Formula One racing.
What?
The entire notion of characters racing to reach their turn.
Oh my god, because it's the speed stat.
Yeah. They're basically racing one another and their adversaries to their turn.
What a fucking nerd!
Waiting to the turn is waiting for the next. Basically taking laps in a race. Yeah. It's a very interesting idea, and it worked out well in the end. But you can see how
it super does, and like it makes sense. But it's just so weird that that's the inspiration for it.
And you wouldn't think, right?
No,
But it's very cool, right?
Thought it's of Formula One while playing any Final Fantasy game.
Yeah, car racing is about the last thing I can think about when playing Final Fantasy.
I would have thought of D&D before. Anyway, whatever.
How neat is that, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. And then I guess since we're on the idea of action-oriented battle systems, there's another one I want to mention because not just because it's fresh in my mind because I'm playing one of the games in the series, but because it's pretty unique in the realm of battle systems in that this series is massively popular and has a battle system that is entirely different from the battle systems of Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. Basically, it's two other competitors and peers. And that would be the linear motion battle system, or LIMS, which is the battle system in the Tales series. So, yeah, the Tales series has a very unique battle system referred to as LIMS, linear motion battle system, and it gets the name linear motion from the idea that your character will always be on a plane of movement that allows you to move either further away or closer to the adversary that you are facing. It's based
starting the trend of action RPGs.
Yeah, it's based on fighting games.
Yes.
It's based on 2D fighting games, and in the original Tales game, Tales of Phantasia, when you go to a battle screen, it looks kind of like a 2D fighter, a primitive 2D fighter.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
It does.
Well,
now,
I can feel the fighting game feel, but
exactly. Like by the time the series transitions over to the 3D, the 3D version of linear motion battle system kind of feels more like an arena brawler.
Yeah,
but you still get
Naruto fighting games.
Exactly. So this is a real-time combat system. It's not turn-based. And you can attack your enemy, and your enemy can attack you at any point. It's based entirely on you executing attacks.
There's an argument to be made for the fact that it is basically just an ATB system, but it's frame data instead of a timer running down.
Exactly. Actually, that's pretty much what it is. And this game, Tales of Phantasia, is a peer of those Final Fantasy games that utilize the ATB system.
Yeah.
Which, like, that's when the first game came out.
Feels like such a natural progression of the ATB system.
Yeah, exactly. And taking it to a different kind of direction. Namco Bandai were really trying to differentiate themselves from both Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy at the time, and even still now, being kind of the third pillar of JRPG long-running series. Even more so than Persona. You wouldn't think that, but that's actually the case.
Just because it's been around so much longer. I feel like people know more about Tales than Persona. Persona is definitely more popular, but
not so much Persona, I should think, but maybe SMT in general.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
SMT has been around for pretty much as long as
you mean that Pokemon ripoff?
The Tales system. Damn. Holy fuck! Those are words. But yeah, something that's really interesting about the linear motion battle system is how it evolved over time. So yeah, in the early game, the thing that I think most defines it, apart from its 2D presentation and gameplay, is the fact that you have the ability to set the characters to go on auto and run on an kind of a pseudo artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And while it's not terribly advanced and doesn't function that good in the original couple of games, by the time you get to, say, Tales of Symphonia, you could put the game on full auto and have it control itself, and there's a very complex board of commands that you can tell your characters to use or not to use, and you can completely customize how the characters act when on full audio by kind of shifting, say, if you want them to use approximately 50% physical attacks and 50% art moves. Arts are basically your magic.
So healing and or fire.
Healing, fire, whatever, any of those kinds of, or buffs and debuffs.
Yeah.
Those moves, you can say like 50-50 physical, 50-50 arts. And if you want them to use items, you can say use items or don't use items. So, maybe you can set them to use an item when you're reaching critical point in your health, or to use them whenever it sees fit to use them. And yeah, by the time you get to Symphonia, this works out pretty good. But the fact that they were ambitious enough to put a fully automated combat system in just the original game alone, fairly cool. I think I really commend them for their ambition there.
It feels like it's what Persona 3 tried to do, but all we got was Marin Karen.
Oh god, I hate Marin Karen.
I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but whatever.
I'm pretty sure it's
anyone who's played Persona 3 knows what I'm talking about, and it's fucking outrageous.
It is fucking insane, actually. And this automated battle system, primitive in Tales of Phantasia, but by the time you reach Symphonia, then Tales of the Abyss, Tales of Vesperia, any of these games, that fully auto battle system is a totally valid way to play the game. You put them on full auto, and then what your role as the moderator of this battle and of the organizer of this party would be is to make sure that everybody is staying buffed and healed. So while everybody is auto attacking and using their moves, they're clearly, they'll be using up TP, which are tech points, your arts points, or losing HP. You can go in and choose when to heal them if they're not going to heal themselves.
Yeah, they're using Marin Karen too much.
It's certainly an easier way to go about grinding as well. And the idea of a RPG battle system based on a 2D fighter, really freaking cool, and I think kind of fits into the intersection of our own interests. It's very neat. And by the time you get to the 3D games, it's a little more like a 3D brawler. But if you're not playing it on auto, you're just directly controlling the character and selecting which moves you want them to use, and you're executing combos. And you're doing complex things like short range and long range attacks, short range and long range combos. By the time you hit the 3D plane, there's stuff like area affecting moves that affect a huge portion of the field or a small portion of the field. It really changes how a person will perceive an RPG.
Yeah.
And it's really, really interesting as a result of that. It's super cool.
It's a good segue into the next game I want to talk about.
Yes.
Which is, of course, clearly, since we're talking about RPGs, everyone, of course, knew we were going to be talking about Devil May Cry.
Yeah, obviously the most obvious RPG of all time.
The biggest RPG. No, but Devil May Cry, in all seriousness, a very clear continuation of the whole RPG turning into a fighting game hybrid. Mm-hmm.
It's like something
Tales did start.
It reminds me of kind of like a
even
mix.
ATB. You can trace it back to ATB. Really,
you honestly could. Yeah, the idea of battle systems becoming more active.
Yeah, that's why I like Final Fantasy VII so much. Is because it's like, oh god, okay, all right, this move. Oh, this the fucking scorpion has its tail up, so we can't do anything. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Kind of fucking thing. It's a very fun battle system, but then Devil May Cry comes and makes it very fleshed out. Hideki Kamiya coming in and being like, hey. And I think the fun thing about those games too is that you can basically play them and just button mash through.
Yeah, you could.
You can no brain them. The only thing is you're gonna get low ranks on the mission completion thing,
and you might get wasted by a boss or two if you're not playing intelligently.
Yeah, I'm almost definitely, depending on what mode you're playing on.
Yeah, I mean, even on the easiest mode, some of those bosses are hard to cheese.
Yes, 100%. Especially early Devil May Cry games.
Yeah.
You know what? Fuck it. Even Devil May Cry 5 gets a little wild near the end, as it should. Because it's a fucking Devil May Cry game.
I mean, I remember watching my friend Neil power through the end of that game, and it was pretty fucking punishing.
So fucking good.
It was pretty fucking punishing, I gotta say.
I want to do a Devil May Cry episode. Were those games on the GameCube? Are the GameCube boys gonna have to... No, they weren't.
No, they weren't, unfortunately. They're all on the Switch now, at least most of the good ones.
No, but I'll have to talk to them about the Capcom 5.
Yeah, I'd like to hop in on that because I own most of those games.
Yeah, that was a Hideki Kamiya joint.
Oh yeah, and they were all pretty interesting too.
Yeah, it was basically Platinum before Platinum went and became Platinum, but whatever.
It kind of was, wasn't it?
Yes, no, it was 100. Yeah, Anyway, we'll talk about it when we do that episode.
But continuing on, yeah.
But yes, the Devil May Cry series, believe it or not, is basically an RPG fighting game. Kind of like God Hand. We could kind of bring God Hand into this.
This is something I think you can say about most games that you would now call character action games.
Yes, they are just RPG games.
Yeah, character action games are RPGs in
even
everything but name only, because the language of that style of combat, like you were saying, can be traced back to stuff like Tales, can be traced back to stuff like the ATB system, and even further back to something like The Legend of Zelda 2 Link's Awakening.
Yeah.
Or some of the, Castlevania 2, Castlevania 3 even.
Yeah.
Like those
Symphony of the Night.
Yeah. Those early side-scrolling action-adventure games with heavy RPG elements.
Yeah, that are still very action-oriented.
Yeah, those are all the peers and predecessors of what Kamiya is doing in DMC.
Yeah.
And it's so... If you think about it for 2 seconds, it totally makes sense.
What if they made it more badass?
Yeah. What if we dress it up as a beat 'em up or a hack and slash?
What if instead of an ATB meter, we had one frame links?
Yeah.
And launcher moves that you could juggle characters with.
Mm-hmm.
The
idea of launcher moves comes right out of Tales.
Exactly.
Those early Tales games, even Tales of Fantasia, have moves that launch characters from one end to the other.
There's the very famous meme tech of DMC1 where you're not trying to get S rank on a mission, and you just launcher the character and then gun, and just juggle them in the air with your gun until they die.
Mm-hmm.
It's I don't know. And clearly, if this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, I have a very huge affinity for the DMC series.
Yeah.
They're probably one of my favorite games outside of fighting games and outside of things like Bayonetta and the Soul series.
Which Bayonetta has so much of a lineage in.
Well, I mean, Bayonetta was just, I don't have the Capcom license. I have to make a character action game.
Yep. I feel like the full, if you ever want to point to a game that perfectly exemplifies how the combat in a game like DMC is basically just an RPG, look at Nier Automata.
Yeah. I mean, Nier Automata is a little different because it has a little bit less of combo, but it still works as an RPG.
That's the thing. It's basically stripping away some of the fighting game elements of that combat style,
and just breaking it down to fully RPG.
Exactly,
and that's why I'm very excited for the Nier remake, which we still haven't talked about. I think actually, surprisingly, because did we talk about that on the podcast?
I don't think we did. We're going to have to. God, that's pretty good news.
Next week we have a normal episode. I have a lot to talk about next week.
Oh yeah, it's actually
going to be a big one.
It's going to be a big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that too because I have a whole bunch of shit I was playing as well. But it's something that you can, like we said, you can just trace the lineage of the DMC combat all the way back to RPGs, which is why it makes so much sense that Final Fantasy 16 is transitioning to this style of gameplay.
Yes.
It's hyper relevant to contemporary RPGs.
Yeah, it's what I wanted to mention earlier when we were talking about Final Fantasy. I was like, yeah, and they're changing into the DMC battle system now, apparently.
Yep.
Which I'm fucking... Yes.
And I mean, it would not be the first time that people at Square have tried to do something kind of interesting with a more, kind of physical and combo-based combat system, because look at Kingdom Hearts.
I believe we talked about it on the episode where we covered that Gamescom thing, but Square actually poached one of the combat designers or something from Capcom that worked on DMC5 to make Final Fantasy 16.
Yeah, well, look at how, say, Final Fantasy 15 played.
Yeah.
And 15's combat system is kind of it's a more advanced iteration of the combat system present in Kingdom Hearts 2, but I feel like a lot of people didn't like it, and I don't necessarily know why. because I actually, it's one of the few things in that game that I can't complain about. I think the battle system in 15 is pretty
I always
good.
was like, I had a mild curiosity for it, and it just kept falling lower and lower on my list as games came out.
15 is a disappointing game for a lot of reasons that I could get into, but I won't because I don't want to spend 30 minutes ranting about how much that game fucked up. But there's a great Super Eye Patch Wolf video actually about it that people could watch if they want to get a good feel for why a lot of Final Fantasy 15 is disappointing.
And I mean, there's a reason I haven't mentioned DMC2 yet.
Oh,
because
God,
we're not going to talk about that.
But suffice it to say, this kind of transition to a DMC-style combat system for Final Fantasy 16 is not a huge surprise to anybody who's kind of been following this line of progression and how combat systems are utilized, because the RPGs of the 20th century, for the, with a couple of notable outliers, are primarily action RPGs, and like a lot of the most popular RPG franchises that have come out or are kind of unique to the 20th century are all action RPGs. Yeah. Look no further than, as I just said, Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is a very popular action RPG series, and the combat is kind of a mix between not so much the fighting game sensibility that you see in something like DMC, but something closer to a beat 'em up. A classic beat 'em up,
and it's like equipable moves, and it's very strange. It's a weird mix of like literally every game we've talked about tonight.
It really, it kind of is, because you have a scrolling menu system that gives you combat options, and of course,
which kind of feels like an ATB system because you do have the timer running down while you're clicking through all the options.
All right, back from the Wii break.
Yes, back from the Wii break. I had to go do my Wii Fit exercises.
The interesting thing, like we were saying, is that the pivot to an action-oriented battle system is just kind of a natural progression of things. It's what Final Fantasy has been going towards for a very long time. But something else about the Kingdom Hearts series that's unique is that every so often they kind of change up how moves are organized and what abilities are available by changing kind of to a different secondary system for combat. So in, say, like, I think, what did they call it in Birth by Sleep? The command deck? Was that what it was called? There's the panel, the panel boards in 358 Days.
Yeah.
Which I really like. I like the panels. Those are interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the easiest things to manage, but they did the job.
They did.
Which is something to say. But I think, was it the command deck in 3D as well, Kingdom Hearts 3D, perhaps.
Yeah, I believe so. In Dream Drop Distance, not 3D. It's Dream Drop.
Oh, sorry, Dream Drop Distance. Pardon me.
That's gonna come kill you.
But that's 3Ds.
Dream
Drop
God.
Distance. That's so clever and intelligent.
Nomura,
reminds me of my favorite Resident Evil game, Resident Evil Deadly Silence.
Do you think?
Guess what console that was on?
Do you think Nomura sat at the table and was like, we've got to think of a name that works with...
He absolutely did. He absolutely
and we'll build the game around that concept. And they didn't actually write the game until they figured out the name for the game.
I 100% guarantee you that is what they did.
Yeah, that's totally what happened.
But, it's something that, like, the Kingdom Hearts series will always kind of iterate and change, but stick to the same thing, except
Chain of Memories.
Except in Chain of Memories,
which
and this is kind of where we get to talk
about because I love that game.
So
and how it plays.
I think it depends on which version of the game you're playing.
Yes, I still have not played the PS2 version. Was the one?
Yes, the PS3 Chain of Memories. See, that's the version I think about when I think about a card-based battle system that I don't think works very well.
Okay. And I played it on the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, I know. I played it on the Game Boy Advance as well. That version of the battle system, I love.
Yes,
I think
that's
great.
the only one I have in my head.
Please explain to everybody why that card-based battle system is fun.
It's just amazing. You build your deck, and then you scroll through with the newly additioned right and left bumper buttons on the Game Boy Advance, and it just works. You got to know where your cards are. It's basically a fucking fighting game in card games because it's real time, right? There's not an ATB thing. Your opponents are also using cards, but you have to be like quick about knowing exactly what you want when you want it, and you have to build your deck in such a way that basically mashing A is the most effective way, except for sometimes when it's not, and then you're like, I gotta scroll all the way to the back of my deck to use the healing item. And then there was the reloading the deck thing, which I don't remember the mechanic of. I think you have to like skip a turn or something.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You do.
Yes. So once all your cards are used, so you have to use your cards in a very like strategic way, where you're doing damage but also healing yourself and also using magic and like taking advantage of the weakness of the enemies and blah blah blah. But if you fuck up, which happens a lot, and you have to rebuild your deck a lot, which was actually one of my favorite parts of the game, was just the fact that like, oh god, now we're at this world. What is this world's gimmick? Okay, we gotta switch take all the ice out of here. It doesn't do shit. It's such a fun. I don't know. I love card games. I still need to get like Hand of Gilgamesh, and what was the other one? Slay the Spire, I think.
Yeah,
I'm gonna do a card.
I think there's something to be said about the influence of TCGs on RPG battle systems in the early 2000s, considering
it's very
that
specific. I mean, even it's Metal funny Gear because Metal Gear Acid's an amazing game.
Acid is a really good card game. Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's actually kind of incredible how good it is. Although it kind of makes sense coming from Konami, who are making the Yu-Gi-Oh card game.
Yes, of course.
But something that's notable about that is like you see how RPG, like pen and paper RPG battle systems, eventually transition to games like Magic the Gathering, fantasy trading card games.
Yeah.
And then fantasy trading card games come back around and start influencing the battle systems in RPG video games.
Mm-hmm.
I find that really fascinating. And it's interesting to see how these different kind of
just volleying off of each other.
Exactly. Like all of these battle systems we're talking about today, they all have the same origin point. And you see how they change and iterate on one another, but define themselves in unique ways regardless. Another unique card-based battle system, maybe the last one we'll talk about for today, also from the early 2000s, from 2003 actually, is the Magnus System in Baten Kaitos. So Baten Kaitos is Monolith Soft's RPG series for the GameCube. There are 2 of them. I think I've talked about them in passing on the show a couple of times.
Yes.
But for those who are not aware, there are 2 games that came out on the GameCube in 2003 and 2006, respectively. Baten Kaitos and Eternal Wings in the Lost Ocean, and Baten Kaitos, or Baten Kaitos Origins, I think it's called. It's just called Origins. Not as pretty a title as the first game, but the series is notable for its card-based battle system, because in the world of Baten Kaitos, there are these magical cards called Magnus, which are basically cards that have the ability to absorb the essence of real-world objects for storage. So they're containers for items, so they can be used for inventory management. But they have like a practical use in the world of Baten Kaitos. So of course, they play into the battle system by becoming how your characters select, say, food, medicine, weapons and armor that are equipped to strengthen characters, and battle moves that you put into a deck that each character has in your party and are used as attacks in battle. It's kind of similar to how Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories plays, except you can also combine cards, and the combining cards can kind of change how different things end up working. So
you're telling me it's Kirby and the Crystal Shards meets Rechained. I mean, fucking Chain of Memories.
It's also a turn-based battle system, so it's a little different from Chain of Memories.
Yeah.
But your character has an offensive and defensive turn, and in that you have a brief number of seconds, kind of like an ATB system, to quickly play a limited number of cards from your pre-built deck. So your weapon cards are used to fight, your armor cards are used to defend, and then you have an effect card to use for healing or buffing.
Okay, so it's Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy.
Yes. Each Magnus has a spirit number in the corner, which ranges from 1 to 9, and playing same number groupings or numbers used in succession, like 1, 2, 3, 4, will result in increased damage. So it really is a TCG, but adding up and changing the values of cards. And like I said, cards can be combined, for instance, to create stronger effects. So say you combine a card like a cucumber, which is a melon, and a honey card. They become honeydew melon. Say you want to create something like curd cheese. Well, if you have a card of milk in your, your card deck, over time, that milk card might become a cheese card because it curdles. Or say if you have a card that's a fruit card, it might turn into a rotten fruit if not used. And then that...
Yeah, okay, that's
pretty
cool.
And yeah, exactly. And then that rotten card will instead harm you instead of heal you. So
unless you're undead, in which case it will heal you instead of harming you.
Exactly. So it's a very unique battle system that I think is pretty notable amongst games of its time for being just really, really ambitious. I think that it's super, super interesting to see how that kind of system eventually evolved into what would you would later start seeing in just full-on card game RPGs that would be coming out later on. So TCG games, seeing how these kinds of elements are integrated into RPGs, and then how when RPGs integrate them in a clever way, those clever utilization of the card system comes back around to TCG games later on. Because these are the sort of things that you later see in games like Metal Gear Acid, where you can combine cards and add up values and detract values and stuff like that. It becomes the backbone of those kinds of games. But yeah, I think Baten Kaitos is very unique. Hopefully the GameCube boys will have me on to talk about those games, because they're fucking nuts. They're so good. Must. They're very difficult as well. They are not easy games. They are pretty unforgiving hardcore RPGs.
I'm just gonna real quick and say the GameCube boys that we keep referring to as the GameCube Was Cool podcast.
Who are really wonderful.
Clarified that the whole episode, but we've mentioned them 70 times now.
So. That is true. They're always linked down in the description of our YouTube video. So if you want to follow them, you can just click the link conveniently located down there in the description.
Yeah, and if you're heartbroken that October and Halloween is over, we did a Resident Evil episode for the I think a week or two ago.
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, just the week before Halloween, we did a really wonderful one.
Are craving the spooky vibes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And trying to ignore the snow that we currently have in Montreal for some goddamn reason.
God, I'm not happy about that.
I don't think
it's kind of disappointing. I guess this is kind of the end of the episode for now. We're probably gonna go on and do another one of these because there's so many other interesting RPG battle systems.
We still have to talk about Kingdom Hearts 2. We have to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake, which has
another one that I think is worth talking about is Xenoblade, which is developed by the same people who did Baten Kaitos.
Yes, of course. So hand in hand.
So
and I have many more card games to play and then talk about afterwards.
So I guess until then, thank you guys for listening to this really fun little bonus round on RPG battle systems. Yes. My name is Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at NouveauArtPunk. You can also find me on Instagram at NouveauArtPunk. And if you want to read my movie reviews, I've been watching a lot of movies. You can follow me on Letterboxd, also at NouveauArtPunk. And then what about you, Ben? Where can people find you?
You can find me over at Scratch Me Silly on basically everything. I think on I changed it on YouTube, so now it's just straight up Scratch Me Silly. It used to be Scratch Me Silly Plays, but I'm doing different things other than just my best of stream videos and stuff. I'm actually going to be recording an episode soon, a video soon.
Vidmeo.
I'm not going to say much about it because it's really dumb, but I'm very excited for it because it's dumb. It's very dumb.
It's going to be fun.
Twitch.tv/ScratchMeSilly. I'm going to be streaming Murder House later tonight after I eat. But if you're listening to this, it's already too late, so you can look forward to the best of video that will be up on my YouTube. My Instagram is also Scratch Me Silly. My Twitter is Scratch Me Silly, and my Facebook is the only private thing I kind of have, honestly. So leave me alone on Facebook.
So leave me alone on Facebook. Please. God damn it.
Yes, I don't want you there.
But
no, yeah.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah.
And please play all of the games that we've discussed. A lot of these games are really fun.
Yeah,
I think all of them are fun. I have nothing but good things to say about the games we spoke about today.
Well, I mean, you want to talk about Chain of Memories?
Not Chain of Memories.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Fair. You know what? Fair enough. I'll give you that one. I need to play that version and be like, what is Ryan talking about? And then come back and be like, you were so right.
You'll see what I mean. Or maybe you won't. Maybe it'll gel with you. I just feel like it didn't work for me. Yeah. Especially having previously played the other Chain of Memories and thinking that game just worked a lot better at that kind of...
I don't know how they
definition at that... well, it's moved to a 3D plane. So it kind of changes... Well, Chain of Memories is a fully 3D game, like the other Kingdom Hearts games.
Oh, no.
Do you see what I mean?
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. I can't wait to play that.
So while Ben mulls over this horrific realization... Thank you guys very much for listening.
Why would you do that?